One of my favorite things to study when I'm reading about the Second World War is the infantry. I love learning about just the basic foot soldier, just the guy on the ground with a rifle, um, doing the hard fighting, bearing the brunt of the casualties. I really love reading about it and learning more about it, learning about their weapons, their tactics. And there's something that if you pay attention to modern conflicts like in Ukraine and Israel, there's this idea of technology, drones, AI, other weapons like that, eventually replacing ground troops, eventually replacing a need for infantry, for foot soldiers, for actually replacing human beings on the battlefield. I don't think this will ever happen. I think you'll always need that human element there. I think that weapons and technology, as we've seen throughout history, have played a huge role in increasing an army's ability to fight and changing tactics and certain things like that. But it never negates the need for the infantryman, for the foot soldier on the ground. And a really great book that covers this very topic is Grunts by John McManus. He goes through several American battles from the Second World War through Iraq. This book covers, I think it's 5 battles. I think there's 10 total, and then there's 5 that are exclusively the Second World War. So it does a really great job of just covering these battles and explaining why there is this need for the foot soldier, even with all the advanced technology that we have. Now, this type of thinking isn't new. It's not exclusive to the 21st century or the late 20th century. This type of thinking of technology, of replacing the foot soldier, replacing human beings, goes back. And in the preface that's in Grunts, John McManus talks about this. It can go back to ancient times where commanders of ancient armies thought that the chariot would wipe out the foot soldier. Then during medieval times, they thought the mounted knight would do this. And each time there's this cycle of a weapon and this over reliance or people thinking that it will dominate, which it does in many cases for a while, and then the infantry adjusts, tactics change, weapons change, and kind of this cycle of history goes on. Another great book that covers this topic is appropriately named On Infantry by John English. And he focuses on infantry from the end of the First World War up into the Cold War, up into uh, the early 90s, which is, I believe, when this book was written, 94, 96, something like that. There's a chapter in here that covers the interwar period. So in between the First World War and the Second World War, there was a British officer named J.F.C. Fuller, and he was a very influential officer in the British Army. He was one of the founding fathers, I guess you could say, of armored warfare, but he kind of went too far in that direction. And what I mean by that is he thought that it was coined as the quote all tank doctrine. So he believed that modern armies, or future armies rather, would be composed almost entirely of mechanized forces, of tanks, of other armored vehicles, and that the foot soldier would really have no place on the modern battlefield. There's actually a great quote in here of kind of what he foresaw the infantry being. You can read right here, or look right here. They would essentially be field police armed with machine guns, rifles, and possibly non-lethal gas to occupy and organize conquered areas and territories. That was kind of the main purpose that he saw for infantry in the future, for foot soldiers, essentially just being field police, military police. Now, of course, this idea that the infantry would essentially just be a occupational force turned out not to be true. And if you look at what actually happened during the Second World War and then wars after that, the infantry played an incredibly vital role, especially depending on the terrain. If you're fighting in urban areas, if you're fighting an insurgency, there are going to be a lot of instances where the infantry is going to be the primary combat arm in dealing with the enemy and with taking and holding ground. And a great book that outlines that is the classic Face of Battle by John Keegan. And there's a great part in here where it essentially talks about that. It says you have all of these fighting vehicles in the Second World War, tanks, aircraft. Despite all that, it was the infantry that did the majority of the fighting. There's a part right here. The battles in the Pacific Islands and Burma were fought almost wholly without benefit of armor, beneath the jungle canopy, almost without intervention by aircraft. The long campaign of Italy was fought by the Germans without air cover and with few tanks. So it just kind of goes on and on. It also talks about how the actual fighting between armored divisions was primarily fighting between infantry and infantry, not tanks and tanks, because the majority of the combatants in these divisions, in these armored divisions, were actually infantry. This doesn't downplay the importance or the need of tanks, of aircraft. Of course, all of these things were essential in winning the war and were essential in combined arms warfare. But it just goes to show that despite all the technological advancements, even today, the infantry, the basic foot soldier, the man with a rifle, is of extreme importance.